You know, we all like the story of Cinderella, don't we? Story of Cinderella. Claire has a book of this. She loves the book. She really only understands the pictures, but as time goes on, she's going to understand the story. And again, it's just classic fairy tale, right? The idea of being the poor, abused slave girl, stepdaughter, all of that, being brought into royalty, into the life of luxury, no more to be mistreated. It's a great fantasy, right? Brought in, and happily ever after, life is no more problem. And we love this idea. We love the enchantment of it, the fantasy of it. We certainly, we long for it in some ways. Little girls always long to be the princess, and the thought that even in my lowly state, right? Even as the poor lowly position that I am, I can someday, be a princess. That's the fantasy that is appreciated, admired, beloved by many around the world, right? When we look at Scripture and we look at the story of Esther, in fact, the last time I preached on Esther, I made this comparison. She's basically the biblical Cinderella, isn't she? She's brought in. She's not necessarily invited to a ball so much as taken from her home and told that she's going to be paraded before the king. Not exactly an equal equivalent and not as glamorous, but she gets brought in to be made as a possibility, as a contender for the royal crown, and so she is taken from her home in that. If you look at Esther chapter 2 verse 1 through 18, we're gonna read this section out, and when we look at this section, there's a reason why the king doesn't like needs a new queen, and sad story that was. But it says in verse 1 through 18, it says, "After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. And the king's young men who attended him said, 'Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of the kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa, the citadel, under custody of Hegai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Let their cosmetics be given them, and the young women who please the king be queen instead of Vashti.' This pleased the king, and he did so. Now there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jairah, the son of Shimei, son of Kish, and a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. He was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at, and when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So when the king's orders and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel, in the custody of Hegai, Esther also was taken to the king's palace and put in custody of Hegai, who had charge of the women. And the young woman pleased him and won his favor, and he quickly provided her with with her cosmetics and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace, and advanced her and her young women to the best place in the harem. Esther had not made known to her people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. And every day Mordecai walked in from out of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. Now, when the turn came for each young woman to go in to King Ahasuerus, after being 12 months under the regulation for the women, since this was the regular period of their beautifying, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with spices and ointments for women, when the young woman went in and the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go in, and in the morning she would return to the second harem in custody of Shagaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not go into the king again unless the king delighted in her, and she was summoned by name. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abnel, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter, to go into the king, she asked for nothing except what Hegai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. Now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her, and when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the women. And she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great feast of all the officials and servants. It was Esther's feast. He also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. So again, all of this to say, here we are, royal Cinderella Esther in her whole series. A little different story, isn't it? She gets taken. Mordecai is wondering what's happening to her. All he can do is wait outside the gate and hear a little bit of news. So it's not exactly a place where she is in no danger at all. And honestly, I think there's really a sense of it's more like Mean Girls. They all like the ones that like her and advance her. The other girls may not be so happy about this. The ones that want the crown. You see this that Mordecai tells her, don't tell them your heritage, your kindred, because who knows what they're going to do with that. So keep that quiet. It's a dangerous situation. And so as she's going in on all this, as Esther's going through all this and she becomes queen, there's some other things that are going on in the kingdom. And in chapter 3, we meet a character known as Haman. If you know the story, Haman is just an egotistical windbag, okay? He's just, there's no other way of saying it. He is all about the ego stroke. He is all about making things for him. And Mordecai doesn't like him. Mordecai knows what kind of man he is, and Mordecai is does not honor Haman the way Haman thinks he should be honored. And essentially, the political environment there draws Haman to a point where he says, I'm going to get the king to get rid of not just Mordecai, but all of Mordecai's people. All of Mordecai's people, and he makes this law and this decree, and it's kind of funny. If you look at it, it's kind of a strange law. Essentially, it's a law that says there's a specific day that all the people get to rise up and attack the Jews and take everything that they have. And that's essentially what it is. It's a day designated for genocide, essentially, within the kingdom. And so, if you read it, it's kind of odd, but that's what's going on. Haman gets that to happen, and the political environment is really interesting because at the end of chapter 3, after all this happens, in verse 15, Haman gets this decree made, and he sits with the king in the palace. In verse 15, it says, the couriers went out hurriedly by order of the king, and the decree was issued in Susa in the citadel. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. And if you look at this picture up here and what's going on, right, you got Haman and the king are sitting, everyone's just, it's all confusion, it's pandemonium. People are like, what do we do? What do we think? I don't know what to do here. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what we're going to do with this situation and this law. Can that law really be real? And Haman and king are just up there partying and enjoying and toasting to how awesome they are and how great this thing is and how it's going to be good for the kingdom. And really, when we think about the chaos that ensured and the attitude of the king and Haman, does it not feel just a little bit like our political environment today? If it doesn't, then you're really not paying attention to politics. If it doesn't, because it seems like we've got people who say, hey, radical new policy, it's going to change everything, and look how awesome we are for doing this policy, and yet the people are just like, man, what are we going to do when this happens? This is stupid. This is moronic. This is ridiculous. And it's all sorts of chaos. That is exactly the world in which Esther lives. And it really does reflect right in that people just do that kind of thing all the time. It is not changed in all these years that ridiculous politics, ridiculous policies go into place, puts people in chaos. And that's what's going on with Esther. And with Esther's sake, and what Esther's going on is, the reality is Esther really doesn't pay a whole lot of attention to politics. As we find out here in chapter 4, Esther's not one to really pay attention to that. And I got to tell you, Kristen is kind of the same way. She doesn't really pay attention to politics. I'm the one who is paying attention to something, and I have to tell her, like, did you hear this? And she's like, no, I didn't hear anything about that. And then I get mad, and I'm like, you won't believe this when I tell you what's going on. And I'm the one who portrays that out. And Kristen then hears it and says, yeah, that's awful. Like, that's terrible. I can't believe that. But she doesn't worry herself over that so much. It must be nice. No, she's a lot more peaceful than I am in that sense. But But Esther doesn't pay attention to politics either. She's not really aware what's going on. If you look in chapter 4, there's a few points here. First off, in verse 1, it says, when Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the midst of the city, and he cried out with a loud and bitter cry. So Mordecai is paying attention, right? He's like, man, I can't believe I'm hearing what's happened here. And he's upset about it. He's mourning it. He doesn't know what's going to happen. And so, but with that, Esther, who has no idea, if we look at verse 5, she says, then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed to attend to her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. So she tries to get Mordecai to come in and put clothes on and take care of himself, and he refuses. And then Esther says, okay, well, what's going on? I don't understand why Mordecai is there. Again, it tells me Esther has not been paying attention to the fact that the city is in chaos. Okay, this isn't just like that news story that got put onto page 12 that nobody heard about. Like, this is front page, city's in chaos, people don't know what to do kind of news. This is chaotic, and Esther has no clue what's going on there. She has no clue, and for whatever, I mean, the palace life, you can say, she's secluded in it. Maybe she doesn't care about it. You name whatever is going on there and why Esther doesn't know what's going on. But Esther does not know what is going on. So Mordecai in verse 8 explains to her. It says, Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her and command her to go to the king to beg his favor and plead with him on behalf of her people. So Mordecai says, okay, I'm going to explain it to you, what's going on and why you should be upset. Okay, and so, kind of assume, like I said, sometimes I have to tell Kristen this is what's happening, and then she gets upset. But it's just like she wasn't aware of it on her own. And so Mordecai explains to her what's going on with that. And so the reality then sets in for Esther. The reality sets in for what's going on, and Esther's afraid. Okay, so it's not like Esther's like, I don't care. It's not like she's callous. She didn't know what was going on. And once she found out what was going on, it sets in for her, and she is afraid of what's going to happen. It says in verse 10 through 11, then Esther spoke to Hathach and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, all the king's servants and the people of the king's province know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. And so Esther, being faced with reality that she is now in a position where maybe she can go to the king, but really she doesn't feel like she can. She's afraid of the consequences. She's certainly afraid of what might happen, but she's more afraid of what will happen if I go to the king. If I go to the king, I'm likely to die, is what she's saying. I'm likely to die, and that fear sets in. And as we've been talking about in this series, right, this idea of I can. I want to feel like I can, and more importantly, that God can. And in this point, this fear that Esther has, she doesn't feel like there is any ability for deliverance. I'm going to be killed once this law goes through, I'm going to be killed when the king doesn't allow me to come in, and either way, I'm in a rock and a hard place. Either way, I'm going to be killed. Either way, it's going to end badly for me, and I'm not even going to be able to accomplish anything. I'm not going to be able to accomplish anything through all of that. And so this fear sets in, and the reality is really, what is it that I can do? What can I do? What can I do? I can't do anything. I can't be the deliverer that you want me to be. I can't plead your case. I can't change anything. All I'm going to do is go and be beheaded. And if you know the story of the king, the king sent his first wife away over really ridiculous circumstances. And so, again, you've got a fickle husband. It's not like it's likely that he's going to put the scepter out and be okay. And so she's like, I don't know what to do. I am not capable. I cannot be the deliverer that Mordecai expects. And yet Mordecai then lays this out for her. He lays this out for her in verse 14 when he says, for if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" So Mordecai puts this out to her, and he lays out what's really true here. It's really fascinating to me because it's a statement that is full of a lot of trust. It's full of a lot of faith, and it lays out some consequences for Esther to really get the real picture going on. Esther's looking at this saying, "I can't do it. I'm going to fail. I'm going to be, everything's going to be taken away from me. I'm going to die either by going to the king, or I'm going to die by waiting for this law to take effect." Mordecai lays it out and says, it does not matter if you keep silent. We're going to be okay. All right, that is a point of no fear, right? That is a point. I have no fear over this situation, because Mordecai is looking at it and says, it does not matter. It does not matter if Esther says nothing. The Jews will not be destroyed by this law that everyone is chaotic about. You hear that? It is not going to destroy the Jews. This law will not take effect. God will deliver through that law. And so Mordecai is not coming from a point of fear, but he does say is that this is on your shoulders to say something. Esther, you don't know that this might be the reason why you were put in the situation you were. You don't know. But if you keep silent, that's not going to go well for you, right? That's not going to go well for your house. That's not going to go well. And that's a statement that says, I'm not because you're the deliverer, not because you're the one who's going to make it happen, because without you, it'll still happen. Without you, that deliverance will come. But your house has an important place in this story that you are supposed to be the one to say something. You have to be the one who is put in this position to speak up where you're supposed to speak up. It's a very interesting perspective. Mordecai's fear is not for the whole of the Jews, and it's not for the law. It's for you need to act faithfully in this moment. You need to have the courage and faith in this very moment, because this might just be why you were put there. You don't know. And so Mordecai lays that hard truth on her. And again, it speaks to the notion of what Esther really needs to understand about the situation. He kind of puts it in a completely different light. And this says to me something about Esther's fear. And I may be right. I might be wrong. This is Justin's opinions, but I think her fear is born out of a sense of comfort. Okay, she was put in a position, right? She might be, she's locked away in the palace and she doesn't really know what's going on outside. She's comfortable. She's safe. She's being well taken care of. She's in a point where there's much to risk. If I go before the king, there's much to risk to me personally. And so the fear of that is to say, I can't put that at risk for all the things I see around me, for all the things that I have available. I have a lot. I have a lot to risk. And I think that risk over comfort is a familiar feeling for our day and age. It's a familiar feeling for how our problems is, because in that sense, Esther kind of looks at the situation, and I think the reason Mordecai speaks to her and says, you will perish if you don't speak up, right? Mordecai laid that out for her. You will perish if you don't say something, even though the Jews are going to be fine. And it's to say is that I think Esther had a feeling of, well, I don't know that I can do it. I don't want to risk everything that I have. And you know what? I might just be fine if I just don't say anything, right? If I don't risk it, if I don't say anything. Mordecai's kind of putting that lie to rest. You will suffer for not saying. You will suffer for not taking part as the deliverer that you have. Your comfort won't save you. I think we feel that way too. Is we think, things are getting bad here in this country, and man, I'm really worried about the next generation, but we probably won't have to deal with that. We probably won't have to suffer for it, and so we're going to be okay, maybe, right? Maybe in the next 20 years, things aren't going to get so bad, and I can, enjoy where I'm at. It's not going to be so bad. Bummer for you guys down the road. Maybe not so much for me, right? Lots to risk for me if I stand up. Some people are going to prison for standing up things, or people are having their lives destroyed on the internet. I don't need to do that. Everything's okay. It's not going to bother me so much. Lots of risk. I think that's kind of the way in which that feels when it comes to the idea of speaking up for what is right. speaking up for a situation that needs to be called out. I think that's pretty widely thought through our nation, certainly through the church, through Christendom, that yeah, that's bad. I don't like that, but I don't really want to put myself out there because that's a lot for me to risk to be able to do it. It's going to be okay if I don't say anything. Bummer for you guys, not so much for me. But that's the idea, is that there is risk. There is risk when we don't speak up about things that are right. We are not saved or spared because of the comfortable situation we find ourselves in. And I think that's the truth that Esther faces in her situation. I think that's the truth that we need to recognize is, you know what? My comfortable situation that I'm in does not guarantee my safety. It does not guarantee that I'm going to be okay throughout a situation that I see around me that's not right. I'm not guaranteed that. And so when we see this with Esther, Esther goes ahead and she takes the risk. In verse 15 through 17, she says, "Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, 'Go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day, and I and my young women will also fast as you do, and then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish.' And so Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him." And so Esther says, okay, and she hears Mordecai, and she says, okay, I'm going to take on the risk. I'm going to take that risk to go into the king. I'm going to put it out there because, right, I think she recognized the wake-up call that, hey, my safety is not guaranteed through this. And so she takes on that risk, and I think it's kind of funny, because if you think about it, is it really a risk to go to your new husband, and go and talk to him? I mean, he liked you. It's like, you guys remember what it was like to be young and in love? Did you did you really not want to see your wife come and see you? Like, I mean, what's the risk really? But again, it's the risk. There is the law, and your husband is kind of chaotic when it comes to those kind of matters. All right, no, she takes that risk. She goes in to see him, and if she goes in to see him, one thing I think is kind of important to note on that is that we tend to have this same attitude. And I think it's a little different for Esther, and at the same time, it's the same, as the idea that when we decide, I'm going to take that risk. I'm going to take that risk for God, right? I'm going to do something. I'm going to step up. We tend to do a little thing and say, look what the big thing I did. Like, look, I did this little thing. How big it is. I posted that one little thing on Facebook that 10 people saw. I'm a big person and I did something courageous. Or I went out and I talked to that one person and I said, maybe you should read the Bible. All right, I'm great. Like we tend to think that way in terms of, that's it. That's all I need to do. And I've done that big courageous thing. And then we leave it at that. And I think if Esther had left it at that, if she had just, gone to the king and at one time and left it at that, again, big whoop. You literally didn't accomplish anything. And yet Esther used that, and I think that she used it in a way that we should use it in our lives as well. Okay, she used it in the sense that she went, she was, the scepter was put out to her, she was allowed to see the king, and she used that as an opportunity to invite him to a banquet. And I have a banquet, and I want you and Haman there. And that was the whole drive that started her to be courageous, and we'll get to that in a second. And so she used something like going to your brand new husband who thinks the world of you over literally every other woman in the kingdom. Okay, and I went to him, and he let me talk to him. Cool, big thing. But that should be the thing that fuels our courage to do the next best thing. Right? That success in small things that we're afraid of should fuel us to do the next big thing that we're afraid of. I have success over there, and now I can go on and I can be successful over here too. Maybe I can be successful in that. And so when we think about that idea of in our lives that I'm going to be bold for God, right? I don't want to think little of the things that you try to do to be bold for God, okay? If you talk to that person in the checkout stand, or you say that thing on Facebook, or you whatever it might be, all right? I don't want you to see that as big whoop, okay? I don't want you to see that as big whoop, because that's the start of acting courageously for God. That's the first step in acting courageously for God. And if you find success in that, all power to you, that you might then take the next step to be courageous for God. We should have small successes. It should be really euphoric to be able to go through the registry and say, I go to church, you should come sometime. And then say, you know what, maybe sometime. And hey, I didn't get cursed out. Now I'm going to go invite that other person when I go to get a coffee or something. Whatever it is, that should be a fuel that charges your courage as you go forward. Don't ever think that's a big whoop. It's just not the end of your courageous steps. All right? It's just the beginning of a road of courageous for God. And so when we see this in Esther, as she is making this step and says, okay, I'm going to invite to a banquet. She not only invites him to a banquet, she gets so scared, she says, well, you know what, I'll invite you to another banquet. And then finally she steps up and she says, I got to tell you, this guy Haman is going to kill all my people. And she announces his plan. She makes it very clear. She tells the king, and through this, there is deliverance. Through this, not only does Haman get hanged, say that 10 times fast. Haman gets hanged on his own gallows. The law is not repealed, but there's a new law that makes it better for the Jews. They get delivered. All that deliverance happens. Not only that, but Esther and Mordecai, they both are involved in making new laws and leading the country in ways that are beneficial for the Jews. All through Esther stepping up and going after and being courageous in that. And I think she learned trust in that again, this isn't about the fact that Esther was the deliverer here. All Esther did was point to what was going on and allowed the king to take the work, allowed the king to let work go on. And really the reality is that when we talk about this idea that I don't think we can get deliverance here. I don't think we can make things happen. I don't think we can change the way our country's moving. I don't think we can change how people think or how our culture is acting or whatever it might be. I don't think I have the ability to influence that change the way it needs to be. When we have that idea, is that I think we need to take the lesson from Esther is that Esther was not the one who changed it. All she did was speak up and say, this is what's happening. This is what's happening, and I need you to see and pay attention to that. And if you can see and pay attention to that, then we can hope that someone does something, that the ones that you address it with will pay attention to it. And with Esther and her situation, that's political, and that's the charge. But really, the reality is that we have a greater deliverance and a greater deliverer than Esther ever did. If you turn with me, we're going to look through a couple verses here. If you look at Hebrews chapter 2 with me. Hebrews chapter 2. Verse 14 and 15 says, since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things, that through the death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. So I want you to bear that in your mind for just a second and flip with me then to Colossians chapter 1. Colossians chapter 1, verse 13 says, he has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. And then once more, we're going to go over to 1 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 10. And it says here, and to wait for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, Jesus, who delivers us from the wrath to come. And so we have been delivered, not just from a world that we live in, right? We're delivered from sin. We're delivered and redeemed from this bondage that we have in sin. But not only that, but we are delivered from a wrath to come, right? So we are delivered right now, and we are delivered in the here to come. We have a deliverance that is greater and bolder than that, because not only does that deliverance come to all of us who trust in Christ, that deliverance is available to everyone else around us. We have a job to tell other people about that. We have a job to bring that to light so that other people might know that deliverance. And that deliverance is endless, right? Esther was hoping for deliverance for her people, and then she got that. And in that, a lot of people died. In that, a lot of people suffered. In that, a lot of people faced some retribution. We have a deliverance that comes to all man at all times. Whoever wants it can have it. We have a deliverance that does not involve the death of any more than just Christ. Christ died for all. He brought all through that, and it's our job to deliver through it. And if we deliver that to someone and they reject it, that's not my fault, that's their fault. If they reject it, I still have opportunity to share to the next person. I still have opportunity to share with them, maybe later down the line. And that is our hope. That is our privilege to be able to bring that idea that there is a deliverance there. And that deliverance does not come from me. I don't have to be successful when I tell people about Jesus. I don't have to win you over. That's not my charge. If you look at Scripture, that's not your charge, is that you have to win people over. You have to tell people. You are required to let people know of that truth. You are not required to be successful that they hear it and listen to it and respond to it. Isn't that an interesting notion? You don't have to do that part. It's up to Jesus. It's up to them and Jesus on whether he wins them over and brings them around. I mean, we have work to do in telling them. It's not simply just, obey that. We have work to teach them what that means. But if they reject that wholly, that's not our fault. That's not our problem. And we get to take that on to the next one. And so with that great deliverance, right, we do not have to put it on our shoulders that I have to do that. We can put that on the shoulders of Christ. We can put that on the shoulders of Christ that says, Lord, do your work. Do your work with them. And then I can take that easy a little bit. And so, Esther had a notion that if I don't do this, if I don't do it, maybe all of the Jews will succumb to this law. Mordecai seemed to understand the opposite, right? You should tell them, and it's important for you to tell them, but you're not the one who's bringing that deliverance. You're not the one who engages deliverance for the Jews. God will deliver that. The Lord will deliver that. And so finally, I want us to take to heart this passage in 2 Timothy chapter 1. It says in verse 7, "For God gave us a spirit, not of fear, but of power and love and self-control." Power, love, and self-control. And so when we take on this idea, this task, that I have a deliverance from God, I have a greater deliverance than Esther. I have a deliverance that brings me out of bondage in this life and it saves me from the wrath to come. That message I have been given, and I've been given everything I need by His Spirit of power, love, and self-control. I have everything in my ability to tell someone, the next person, about that deliverance. I am not given a spirit. I am not given a spirit where I should live in fear of what will happen if I tell someone about that deliverance. Right? God did not charge me. God did not set me up to live a life of fear over telling someone about Christ. I was not given that spirit. If I live a life of fear and I live a life where I'm afraid of what might happen if I tell someone that they need Jesus, if I tell someone that baptism is the only way to get to Christ, if I tell someone what I see in Scripture and how important that is, if I live in fear of that, that is not coming from the Lord. That is not coming from His charge to me. I am actually denying the power He gave me. The power He gave me to be able to tell someone, to be able to charge someone with what you need to do with that truth. And so we need to live a life, we need to take courage that the life that I've been given, the charge I've been given of deliverance, that needs to be set before people. I need to have the courage to be able to take that forward and to bring that deliverance about for them so that they can make their decisions with it. They can take that deliverance and do with it whatever they please. But I know I've put it in your path. I know I've put it to you. And whatever the outcome, whatever the circumstance, I can be affirmed of my own deliverance. Because you can attack me over that. You can disown me, you can discredit me, you can call me not your friend anymore, you can put me in prison, you can do all sorts of things to me, even take my life. And I know that deliverance is still firm for me. I know that deliverance is still coming for me. And I'm going to put it before you, and you can do whatever you want, but you can't take that deliverance from me either. We need to have that charge. We need to have that courage when it comes to how we walk in this world. And again, in this political era, in the culture that we live in, it seems like we're the lone voice crying in the wilderness, right? That we are saying it and nobody wants to do anything with it. Nobody wants to listen. People want to silence us if we tell them what's true or what they're doing is wrong. But we need to take the courage, as Esther did, to take those small steps of victory, and fuel our courage as we see victory in the small things, that we might actually see this message progress. We might actually see us be victorious when we tell others about Christ. And so this morning, in an effort to be courageous, I'm here to tell you, if you have not accepted Christ, if you have not entered those waters of baptism to die to yourself, to be raised to that newness of life, that is the only way in which you will experience this deliverance. That's the only way you will receive it. And I want you to know that deliverance. I want you to know that that's how you get it. I want you to take that step. I want you to make that decision. And you can do with that information what you will. But I want you to know that that's the truth and that's the reality. And I want you to be able to take that. And whatever you need to be able to get you to that step, I want you to know that myself and anyone else here who has made that decision already will help you, will walk with you, will talk with you about whatever you need to make it there. And this morning, that decision is up to you, but I encourage you to make that decision to enter into the waters of baptism, to be raised to that newness of life and walk with Christ forever and know that deliverance. But if there's anything else we can do for you, if there's any way we can pray for you, talk with you, study with you, let us know this morning as we stand and we sing.